My name is Reza Haddad. I'm from Iran, and I currently live in Tehran. Though much of this story unfolded during a tense and unforgettable season in Mashhad, I'm a documentary filmmaker and occasional journalist, which means I'm used to chasing whispers before they become headlines. But nothing prepared me for the way a single woman's voice, soft, trembling, and impossible to ignore, turned into a wave that swept across screens, streets, and even the quiet corners of people's homes. This is what happened when Vera, the Afghan maid who once worked for Ali Khamenei, went viral for her testimony. And when reports began to spread that Jesus was appearing in Mashhad, Iran, I still remember the first time I heard Vera's name. It wasn't in a newsroom or at a press conference. It came to me through a late-night message from a cousin who works in Mashhad, sent with the kind of urgency that makes your stomach drop. Rizut, there's a woman, Afghan. She worked in a very high place. She's talking. People are sharing it like wildfire. I stared at my phone for a long moment, the city outside my window humming with ordinary life, motorbikes, distant calls to prayer, the smell of hot asphalt after rain. In Iran, very high place can mean many things, but when it's paired with viral testimony, you learn quickly to separate rumor from something that might actually crack open the surface of the everyday. The next morning, I opened YouTube and typed her name, Vera. The results were already overwhelming. Clips, reposts, translations, debates. Some videos had millions of views. Some were shaky, filmed in dim rooms with poor audio. Others were polished, as if someone had been waiting for this moment for years. The common thread was Vera herself, an Afghan woman with a careful accent, her hands sometimes visible in frame, her eyes steady even when her voice shook. She spoke about her time working as a maid in a household associated with Ali Khamenei. She didn't give a perfect timeline at first. She didn't name every room or every date, but what she said landed because it was intimate. The small humiliations, the long hours, the feeling of being watched, the pressure to remain silent. She described how she had learned to read the moods of the house, the way you learn to read the weather by the sound of footsteps, the tone of a voice, the sudden stillness that meant something had gone wrong. I watched one clip 3 times in a row. In it, she said, "I came to this country to work. I came because I needed to feed my family, but I didn't come to disappear." That line hit me harder than any accusation, because in Iran, as in many places, domestic workers, especially Afghan workers, often live in the margins. Their stories can be true and still be dismissed as exaggeration, or worse, as propaganda. But Vera's testimony had a texture to it. She wasn't performing outrage, she was telling a memory, one that clearly still haunted her. By midday, social media had split into camps. Some people believed her immediately, sharing her words as evidence of injustice that needed to be named. Others called her a liar, a tool, a paid actor. A few warned that amplifying her story could create unrest. I understood the fear. Iran has seen enough moments where a spark became a fire. But I also understood the hunger. People wanted truth, even if truth came with consequences. I decided to travel to Mashhad. Mashhad is a city of pilgrimage, of devotion, of crowded shrines and quiet alleys. It's also a city where faith and politics can collide in strange ways. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different from Tehran, more charged, more watchful. In the bazaar, I heard snippets of conversation about Vera. In tea houses, men lowered their voices when her name came up. Women exchanged glances, as if they were sharing a secret that might get them into trouble. And then, almost as if it were another thread in the same tapestry, I started hearing the other story. "Have you seen it?" Someone asked me about Imam Reza's shrine. "Jesus, he's appearing." At first I thought it was a joke, or a metaphor. But the person who said it wasn't joking, he pointed toward a group of young people gathered near a wall, where someone had taped up a phone, playing a shaky video. I pushed closer. The footage showed a dim corridor, maybe a hallway in a private building, maybe a public space, hard to tell. In the corner of the frame, a figure seemed to emerge, not sharply, but like a soft glow forming into a human shape. The crowd murmured. Some crossed themselves. Some wept. I felt a chill run through me. I'm not the kind of person who dismisses spiritual experience out of hand, But I also know how easily a phone camera can lie. Light can play tricks. I hope I can create images, and in a place like Mashhad where faith is powerful and surveillance is real, people's need for something miraculous can become a story all by itself. Still, the timing was impossible to ignore. Vera's viral testimony and these reports of Jesus appearing were spreading in the same digital ecosystem. One was about power, injustice, and a woman refusing to be erased. The other was about the sacred, breaking through the ordinary. Together, they created a pressure cooker. That night, I found Vera's contact through a network of activists and Afghan community organizers. She agreed to meet me, but only in a small apartment on the outskirts of Mashhad, with a trusted person present. When she opened the door, she looked smaller than she did on camera. Tired, yes, but also determined, like someone who had already decided that fear would not get the last word. "I'm Vera," she said, in Farsi with an Afghan lilt. "I worked there for 3 years." I introduced myself, and we sat down. The room was simple. A rug, a kettle, a framed photo of her children. She glanced at it often, as if drawing strength from their faces. I didn't want to speak, she told me. I was afraid, but silence was killing me. And then I started hearing about people seeing Jesus, and I thought, maybe God is trying to tell us something. Maybe it's time. That was the moment I knew this story wasn't just about one woman's testimony. It was about a collision of testimony and revelation, of political power and spiritual longing happening right in the heart of Mashhad. Vera and I met 3 more times over the next week. Each time, she spoke more carefully, as if she were choosing each word like a stone she could place across a river. She told me about the household she worked in, how she entered through a side door, how she was expected to be invisible, how she learned the rules without ever being given them in writing. The rules were simple. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look too long. Don't ask questions. Don't repeat what you hear. But I heard anyway, she said with a small, sad smile. Walls have ears, and servants notice everything. She described the rhythm of the house, early mornings, long afternoons, the smell of cooking that never seemed to reach her own plate. She spoke about being paid late, being told her work was a blessing, being reminded that she was lucky to be there at all. She described how other Afghan workers warned her not to trust anyone, not even each other. Fear, she said, had been planted like seeds. I asked her directly about Ali Khamenei. She hesitated, then nodded. I saw him, she said, not every day, but enough to know how the house moved around him. She described the atmosphere when he was present, a kind of controlled silence, like everyone was holding their breath. She described the way people spoke to him, careful, reverent, sometimes trembling, and she described the way she was treated when she made a small mistake, like dropping a glass. The scolding was never just about the glass, she said. It was about reminding me where I stood. Her testimony wasn't only about personal humiliation. She spoke about things she overheard, conversations about policy, about security, about how the state managed dissent. She didn't claim to have secret documents or insider blueprints, but she insisted that even a servant in the house could hear enough to know that the public story and the private reality didn't always match. As she spoke, I kept thinking about the other story unfolding in Mashhad, the reports of Jesus appearing in the streets. The videos kept circulating. Some showed what looked like a face in a window. Some showed a figure in a crowd. Some were clearly edited. Others, harder to dismiss. People argued about them with the same intensity. They argued about Vera. Faith became evidence. Skepticism became betrayal. I visited the locations where the supposed appearances were reported. Near one shrine entrance, a young man named Arman approached me. He had bright eyes and a worn prayer book in his hand. I saw him, Arman said, not on a screen, in the alley behind my uncle's shop. It was like the air changed. Like the light became softer. I turned, and there he was, Jesus. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't unsee it. I asked what Jesus looked like. He struggled to describe it. Kind, he said, and sad, like he was seeing everything we've done to each other. That answer stayed with me, because it was in Tia Superedo. Jesus. It wasn't a political Jesus. It was a Jesus who seemed to be witnessing suffering. Meanwhile, Vera's testimony was gaining traction beyond Iran. Afghan communities in Kabul, Herat, and abroad began sharing her words. Iranian exiles translated her clips. Human rights organizations mentioned her case in statements. Though carefully aware of the risks, the state's response began to take shape too: denial, dismissal, and warnings against spreading falsehoods. Vera told me she had received threats. Not all of them were direct. Some came as warnings from people who claimed to be helping her. Some came as silence from people she had once trusted. She showed me messages on her phone, vaguely ominous, the kind that didn't have to say much to mean a lot. "I knew this would happen," she said, "but I didn't know it would feel like this, like the whole country is watching me breathe." I asked her why she kept going. She looked at the photos of her children again. "Because if I stay silent," she said, "then they win. And I can't let them win, not just for me, but for every worker who gets told they don't matter." In Mashhad, the two stories, Vera's testimony and the appearances of Jesus, began to intertwine in people's minds. Some saw Vera as a kind of modern witness, speaking truth from the margins. Some saw the Jesus sightings as a divine response to injustice, a reminder that God was still present. Others saw both as dangerous, as sparks that could ignite unrest. I saw something else. A moment when a society's deepest fears and deepest hopes were colliding at once. The week Vera's testimony truly went, Vera felt like living inside a storm that never stopped. Every morning, new clips appeared, some authentic, some edited, some clearly designed to inflame. Every afternoon, new debates erupted in comment sections, on Telegram channels, in family WhatsApp groups. Every night, I found myself scrolling past arguments that sounded like they were about different realities entirely. I tried to keep my reporting grounded. I verified what I could. I cross-checked dates. I spoke to Afghan community leaders who knew Vera before she worked in that household. I spoke to former domestic workers who recognized the patterns she described. I also spoke to skeptics, lawyers, journalists, ordinary citizens who demanded proof, who worried about manipulation, who feared the consequences of a false story. Vera understood the need for verification. She didn't pretend she had a perfect archive of evidence. "I'm not a lawyer," she told me. "I'm a maid. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know what I felt." That honesty, I think, was part of why people believed her. She wasn't claiming omniscience. She was claiming a witness. In Mashhad, the Jesus sightings were becoming more organized. People began gathering at specific times and places, holding candles, praying, and filming. Some gatherings were peaceful, almost tender people, singing hymns softly, sharing stories, holding hands. Others turned tense as security forces arrived, as bystanders filmed the authorities filming the crowd. I watched a young woman cry as she told me she had seen Jesus in a dream the night after watching Vera's testimony. "He told me to speak," she said. "He told me not to be afraid." I didn't know what to do with that statement as a journalist. Dreams aren't verifiable, but they are real to the person having them. And in a moment like this, the line between personal revelation and public event was blurring. The state's response grew sharper. State-affiliated outlets ran pieces questioning Vera's credibility, emphasizing her Afghan nationality, suggesting she was being used by foreign actors. Some commentators accused her of insulting Iranian society. Others warned that religious sentiments were being exploited. I understood the strategic logic. If you can discredit the witness, or frame the spiritual reports as foreign influence, you can weaken the movement before it becomes unmanageable. But the more they pushed back, the more the story spread. People who had never cared about domestic labor suddenly cared because Vera had become a symbol. People who had never thought about Jesus suddenly thought about him because Mashhad, one of the most important Shia pilgrimage cities in the world, was now a place where set reports were circulating. I asked Vera how she was holding up. She showed me her phone again. The threats had escalated. Some were anonymous, some were specific. She had started sleeping in different places, moving between homes of friends and relatives. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I'm also angry. Because they act like I'm the problem. But I'm just telling the truth." One afternoon, I attended a small gathering near a park where a few people had come to pray and talk about both stories at once. It was a strange, beautiful mix. Afghan workers, Iranian students, older women in chadors, young men with smartphones. Someone read Vera's testimony aloud. Someone else played a video of one of the Jesus sightings. No one seemed to know exactly what they were supposed to do with all of it. But they were doing something important. They were refusing to let the moment be owned by fear. A man stood up and said, "If Jesus is appearing here, maybe it means we are being called to see each other differently. Maybe it means we are being called to stop pretending that suffering isn't happening right in front of us." I wrote that down because it captured the heart of the moment. Not a demand for a single interpretation, but a demand for attention. That night, I called my editor in Tehran. "This is bigger than one woman," I told him. "It's about power, faith, and what happens when someone speaks from the bottom." He was cautious. "Be careful," he said. "This can turn dangerous fast." I knew he was right. But I also knew I couldn't walk away. Vera had trusted me with her story. The people in Mashhad had trusted me with their experiences, and I had trusted myself to tell it honestly. As the days passed, the story began to take on a life of its own. Vera's testimony was no longer just her words. It was a rallying point. The Jesus sightings were no longer just videos. They were a spiritual language that people were using to express hope, fear, grief, and longing. In Mashhad, these two currents flowed together until it was hard to say where one ended and the other began. I met with a cleric who was willing to speak off the record. He was older, measured, and deeply concerned. He didn't dismiss Jesus sightings outright. "People see what they need to see," he said. "Sometimes it's a sign, sometimes it's a projection. But either way, it tells us something about the spiritual state of society." Then he turned to Vera. "If what she says is true," he said, "then it is a serious matter. If it is false, it is also serious, because it can divide people and damage trust. The state must investigate properly, not with propaganda, but with justice." That felt like a rare thing to hear. A call for due process in the middle of a media storm. I also met with a group of Afghan workers in Mashhad. They spoke in low voices, careful not to be overheard. They told me stories that echoed Vera's about long hours, withheld wages, threats of deportation, the constant fear of losing their jobs. One woman, Fatima, said, "Vera is saying what many of us have thought but never dared to say. That's why they want to silence her." Another man, Hassan, added, "And when people see Jesus, maybe they're seeing what they've been missing, mercy. Because mercy is rare in this life." Their words made me realize that the viral nature of the story wasn't accidental. It wasn't only about a famous household or about a religious apparition. It was about unmet needs, the need for truth, the need for dignity, the need for something holy to break through the hardness of everyday life. In the streets, the atmosphere grew more polarized. Some people carried Vera's image on their phones like a badge. Others treated anyone who believed her as a traitor. I saw arguments escalate into shouting matches. I saw families stop speaking to each other. I saw how quickly a society can fracture when it feels cornered, when faith and politics are both under pressure at once. And then there was the security presence. It was subtle at first. More patrols, more plainclothes officers near gathering spots, more surveillance cameras pointed toward places where crowds tended to form. Later, it became less subtle. People who had organized prayer gatherings were questioned. Activists who had shared Vera's testimony received warnings. I received my own warning, an anonymous message on social media, followed by a call from someone who didn't identify himself, but made it clear he knew where I had been staying. "Be careful what you publish," he said. "His city doesn't need more fire." I hung up, my hand shaking. I thought about Vera, alone in that small apartment, moving from place to place. I thought about Arman, the young man who said he had seen Jesus in the alley. I thought about how quickly a story like this could become dangerous, not because it was false, but because it was true enough to threaten someone. Still, I kept going, because I had promised myself I would tell it as I saw it. One evening, Vera and I met again. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were clear. "People ask me why I did this," she said. "I tell them, because I'm tired of being a ghost." I asked her what she wanted to happen next. She didn't ask for revenge. She didn't ask for chaos. She asked for something simple, almost modest: an investigation, a chance to be heard, protection for workers like her. And what about the Jesus sightings? I asked. She smiled faintly. I don't know what they are, she said, but I know they're making people look up, and maybe that's the first step. If people start looking up, maybe they'll start looking around. Maybe they'll start seeing each other. That was the crossroads of it all. Faith pointing toward justice, and justice demanding that faith be honest. Mashhad, a city built around reverence, was suddenly a place where reverence and outrage were standing face to face. The final days of my time in Mashhad felt like the moment before dawn, dark, heavy, and full of possibility. Vera's testimony had already become a landmark in the public conversation. Whether people admitted it or not, the reports of Jesus appearing had become a spiritual phenomenon that couldn't be neatly dismissed, even if they couldn't be neatly proven. And the state, caught between the need to maintain order and the need to manage legitimacy, was tightening its grip. I met Vera one last time before returning to Tehran. She had moved again, to a smaller apartment with fewer windows. A friend sat nearby, listening, ready to step in if anything went wrong. Vera's children were still far away, and I could see how much that distance cost her. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched, then forced herself to breathe. I'm not going to stop, she said. Even if they try to erase me, people have heard me now. That's something. I asked her what she wanted people to remember about her, about the work she did, about what happened in that house. She thought for a long moment. That workers are human, she said. That silence protects the powerful, that truth is not always convenient, but it's still true. Outside, Mashhad continued its ordinary life. Pilgrims moved through the shrine complex. Shopkeepers called out prices. The call to prayer rolled over the rooftops, but underneath that ordinary life, there was a new awareness. People were watching. People were listening. People were asking questions they might not have asked a month earlier. I visited the places where the Jesus sightings had been reported one more time. The crowds were smaller now, more cautious. Some gatherings had been broken up. Some people had stopped filming, afraid of being identified, but others still came quietly, carrying candles, sharing stories in whispers. I met Arman again. He looked tired, but his eyes were steady. Do you still believe you saw him? I asked. Yes, he said. And even if it was only in my heart, it changed me. It made me more gentle. It made me more willing to stand with someone who is suffering. That answer stayed with me as I packed my things and headed back to Tehran. Because, whether the appearances were supernatural, psychological, or something else entirely, they had done something real. They had given people a vocabulary for mercy, in a hard season. Back in Tehran, I began assembling my footage, my notes, my recordings. I knew the story would be attacked from every side. Some would say Vera was lying. Some would say the Jesus sightings were fake. Some would say both were distractions. Some would say both were signs. I couldn't control what people believed, but I could control whether I told the story with honesty. Because this story wasn't only about a viral testimony from Ali Khamenei's Afghan Maid, Vera. It wasn't only about reports of Jesus appearing in Mashhad, Iran. It was about what happens when a society is forced to really look at the margins where people have been working in silence, and at the heavens where people have been searching for hope. It was about the moment when truth and faith collide, and everyone has to decide what they're willing to see. I am Reza Haddad, from Iran. And this is what I saw when the world finally started listening.